Wrong week to quit sniffing glue.
Boys, I'd like to make an announcement. Little Louie, God bless him, he's not with us anymore.
Welcome back, kids. It is week two of the Fabulous Valley Forge build. Just like week one was all about brass and tubing and the 3D printed parts and getting all of those done, week two is going to be all about the resin parts. Resin parts, of course, most importantly, are this huge hunk of burning resin here that is, like I said, very difficult to lift with one hand. Very heavy. You can see I've got tiny little snippets of the brass tubing in the holes, and that's really only to keep any paint from getting in there when I go to painting them. They're just blocking the areas so I don't get any paint. I've also got some plastic tubes here that I can put in these channels to keep them clean and fresh and keep the paint off of them, so that when time comes to put the brass tubing back in, that there's no paint there that's gumming up the works. So these will only be needed while I am putting a primer and the top coats of paint on. Also, you see the bridge and other superstructure parts that need to go on, and the domes. Now the domes I can go ahead and paint up. You can see I've already started with putting some primer on that one to see how it looks. I can go ahead and prime these and paint these and weather them and do all of that marvelous work, and then put them on the girders before I even start any of the landscaping, because I can do the landscaping on these individual discs and then just drop them in place after I'm done, which is great because you can see how wobbly this is. It would be tough to work on if I am working on the landscaping bits. I can simply work on these off to the side and drop them into place, and then put the domes on top of them. That kind of finishes it up. Interesting, what you see here are inserts, and they go on the four sides of this inside of this hole here, this cutout, and they will provide all of the detail that you see here. They need to be shaved down and sanded and made to fit, and then we can talk about any additional wire piping that we need to run. That's going to be its own animal. The one thing I did do this weekend, I started early, was I went ahead and put this piece on. This was an add-on piece. I don't know the history of why it was not cast into the rest of the model, but it was left off of the original big hunk of casting, but it was supplied as an extra piece, and there's some detail that need to be scraped off here and some detail that needs to be put back on top of that. But I wanted to do that over the weekend because it took many coats of sanding and Bondo and more sanding to get that nice and level, and that way I could hit the ground running with it this week. See if I can turn this over without all these little tubes flying out. There you can see how I sanded it up, bonded it on the bottom. So we'll be putting some primer on that, and you can see why I have these in. I just have them in to block up the holes so that no paint gets in them while I am painting the rest. They're just there for temporary, not there for keeps. So, it's a crappy, wet, rainy day out today, so I don't think I'm going to be doing much priming. I'll see if it's supposed to clear up, but if it does, I can go back to priming. But I think the first thing I want to do is work on these panels here. Alrighty, I'm just finishing up the day since the sun did come out a little bit late in the afternoon, and I was able to get some primer on the resin parts. I am finishing the day. I'm finally getting the chair squeaked out. I am finishing the day doing the pre-shading, and I appreciate appreciating. Going through with the Lin Gray. I don't want to go all the way to black because this none of the white parts on the Valley Forge were all the way to black, so there's no sense wasting black paint on it. I would rather use a Lin Gray and then work up from there. It's a cool gray. I'll be putting some warm warm grays on here as when we get closer to the finish. But what I wanted to do now is now that I have the primer coat on these, is to go through and put a pre-shade of Lynn Gray on here that I can then start building my whites up from there. Good morning, folks. It's Tuesday. Work continues on the silent running Valley Forge. Looks like a bit of a mess right now, and I don't blame you for thinking that, but it's all part of the plan. Yesterday I put a coat of Lynn Gray on all of the resin parts. Well, all the dome and some of the central part. And that is in an effort to introduce shadows and pre-shading. And then today I went ahead and put a medium size, I wouldn't say a heavy coat, I wouldn't say a light coat, but a medium coat of Deck Tan. This right here, this Deck Tan Tamiya, over top of the undersides of the domes and some of these bridge pieces, just to hit the highlights. And you can already see the mottled look of it, where you still see some of the gray shadows and shading. And that is because the white, if I just painted a straight white, it would be boring as hell. So to introduce, because I'm not going to have, you know, extensive studio lighting on this to throw shadows and shades on it. If you're making a model for the movies, you can afford to, you can get away with it. You can paint something white and then throw a harsh light on it, and that will give you all of your shades and shadows. In the setting where this is going to be displayed in a room, unless you have those same types of, you know, high intensity lights on it, you're not going to get those shades and shadows. So you've got to create those. And I do that by pre-shading a darker color underneath. Now, why I went with the Deck Tan as opposed to a typical medium gray is because I wanted to warm those up a bit. There's a lot of creams and whites happening on Valley Forge, and that's what I wanted to emulate. I didn't necessarily want it to be cold, sterile, cool grays all over the place. So when I do this Deck Tan, it is a very, very warm gray. It's not really so much a tan as it is a warm gray. And then when I put the white over top of that, you will see that warm undertone, which is what I'm shooting for. And then I will, when I put white on this, it will not be a heavy plastered, you know, dunk it in a vat of white and pull it back out, so that you will still see these shades and shadows and undertones in it. That is the goal. So I'm happy with where all that is sitting. I'm turning my attention now to the central piece here, because while I've got this replacement piece or this additional piece built in and sanded in and primered in, and it's looking good. Let me see if I can zoom in on it so that you can see what it is I'm talking about. This was a piece that was left off of the original casting, but added as a supplemental piece. And then there are some details here that need to be added back. First, you have to break and sand off this bit of piping, and then you add these little hexagons to it, which are marvelously printed. These are beautiful. These are not resin pieces. These are 3D printed pieces, and they're beautiful. And these need to be added back to return this detail to what it should be. So before I put any more primer or anything over this, I want to make sure that these pieces are glued down so they will have the same height. I don't, if I put too many coats of paint down and then tried to glue them, they would stick up higher than the rest of them, and that's no bueno. So I'm going to put them in place, put a tiny drop of very thin CA to hold them down, and then the next time I go over all of this with the primer, they become homogeneous and part of the ship. And there you can see the new detail is in place. There's the 5 hexagons, and then just this new little bit of piping that goes down towards the outside edge. It's time to start considering the dreaded photo etch. And yes, I've used bits of it before when I was working on the rear antenna, the radar assembly. But as we get into this area that has these I gotta find it, these separate detail pieces that need to go in. And they require some of these screens. So I want to get a coat of a etch primer on here so that paint will stick to it without too much fuss. And the instructions for these D parts call for you to bend them in such a way as to make them look conical. And they recommend using a ball peen hammer, and I thought that was a little bit, that again was overkill. But I took just my old friendly reamer here, and everybody should have a friendly reamer. It's good for, particularly if you're opening back up the ends of the brass tubes after you've cut them off, you can go back in and ream them open and clean the burrs out. Very, very good for that. But I've also found that if I took just a regular piece of wood, sat this down on a piece of wood and just kind of pushed them down, that it would give me the conical shape that I was looking for without too much muss or fuss. So now that that's been done, I want to go ahead and get a coat of primer on this, and I want to use the metal etching primer particularly. So let me pull out that big old can. Okay, I just came back in. I put a coat of primer over the whole thing. Light coat, light dusting. And hopefully you can see the benefit of having these four sticks in there, for lack of a better term. The plastic tubes keep these areas clean for the brass that will go in there. So I'll go ahead and lay those back in. They're not hurting anybody right now. And this area here that I just put these new details down looks as natural, looks like it's always been there. Looks like it was designed that way. So that's a big yay. Now, what I want to do, to quote Sheryl Crow, is have some fun. What I want to do is we've got this bridge module, and you can see the difference in the paint colors now with the deck tan on here. That's going to sit like that. And this needs to get glued down, and when it gets glued down, it needs to be seamed around the bottom because it doesn't sit exactly flat. There's some gaposis going on, so I want to make sure that when I butter this with the epoxy to put it down, that I have enough that it will help squeeze out around that edge and kind of do some sealing on its own. These are the bridge superstructure parts. But before I do that, I want to see if there is, and this is the third, I guess this is the last part of it here. What I want to see is there any piping that I need to add to this? Because a lot of the piping that is in the instructions that they say to add is actually cast into the parts. And the instructions are only there if you have somehow sanded off the casted pipes, or in the process of molding it, they didn't come out quite clean enough and you want to sand them off and put them back in. These are pretty good. Now there are some obvious missing pipes, and I'm just going to go through here and put in some that are going to be easy enough to do. So I want to go ahead and do that with this piece before I nail it down, because it's never going to be easier to handle than it is right now. And I don't have to reach over the whole ship to do it. I can concentrate on just this piece. I do have to be careful, though, that when I go to nailing it down or gluing it down, I'm not going to use nails, that's just an expression. When I go to nailing this thing down, that I don't bump any of these new pipes. I don't put anything that's too fragile down. See, this rocks a bit, and that's how you can tell it's not sitting level in the part. There's a high spot somewhere. So I want to fill that in with epoxy so that it will sit level, and the epoxy will fill in any of the low spots. So that's a thing to do. And again, you can see how the last pipe would go. Well, I'll pull one of these out, but you can see how it would go in here. and gives you the 3-pipe configuration right here. So that when you have the reddish orange pipe coming through there, that's going to give you a lot of your color contrast. Okay, so I've pulled the main body back off of the shelf, off the side table for a minute, because I want to fit these 4 walls that go and make up the inside of this structure hole. I want to make sure that they're going to fit, and making them fit inside the hole is job 1. But I mean, fitting along the wall that they go in is job 1. But then you remember that there are also side walls, so I got to figure out, okay, which one of them goes in first, because I can slide one down into place, but then when it comes to sliding this one, okay, I've got to slide it down over top of some other detail and make sure that they don't run into each other. So some things have to go in before other things, and I'm trying to figure out the best methodology for doing that, and making sure that when I put the other one up next to it, that I'm going to be able to slide it in place, and all of that good noise. So better to err on having too much room, having a gap, than to have too little room and have the walls buckle because they won't lay flat. The nice thing about this is, if whatever happens, I can always disguise the joint with a bit of piping if I want to. If the gap is too big, and none of these gaps are really anything more than what the first coat of primer paint wouldn't cover. Yeah, I've got all the walls roughly fit in here. Now the only problem with what makes this short wall particularly difficult is that, if I can pull it out here, I will show you. Let's see, these, I've got the order which, because the walls kind of overlap each other on the corners, and I need to make sure I've got them going in just the right order. But the short wall has got this lip on the bottom of it. You see that lip there, which is nice. It's nice reinforcing and strength and all that. But unless I cut a little bit of an angle on both sides of it, it is unnervingly in the way of trying to get the other walls laid in. See, they'll lay flat just fine as long as there isn't another wall impinging on it. But once you get the other wall in place, it kind of wedges in behind there and holds it in place. So as soon as I get all of these cut to size and sanded to size and stop making things jump up in my face, I can get to the detail painting on it. And the detail painting on these is really going to dictate the colors and styles of the detail painting of the rest of this. So it's nice to have a little test case, because if I screw something up, it's an easy quick fix. But it'll help tell me what is necessary, what isn't necessary, what will never be seen, that kind of thing. So it'll help me gauge how much paint to put on, and how much, I'm not going to say how much care to use, because, you know, I like to use care on everything, but how much of it is, how much effort to put into places that may or may not be seen. And that's okay. This is where it would be handy to have a microscope, start working with this photo etch. Now, from the layouts on the instructions, this seems to be where these 5 pieces of etch want to be. Unfortunately, I look underneath there, and there are no, let's see if I can pick this up. There are no details. For it, there's nothing for them to rest on, to lay flat. So I think what I need to do is stop mucking around with the tweezers. So you can see there's nothing really under there for that to rest on, to keep it nice and flat. So I think what I need to do is just get a little piece of sheet, either sheet styrene or some square stock or something, and just glue it down there so that I have a base to set this on to keep it nice and level. So I put a wash over these panels, and I know it's maybe all those years of painting Star Destroyers that ruined me, but I like this better with just this wash over it. And I'm going to mist the whole thing with a white later on, so don't worry. But I like the way these grills now show up against the darker background. Okay, and now you can see I've got the brass bits glued down there, and I think putting in those little blocks behind it really helped, because now they lay nice and flat. And my only question now is, do I put them in, install them into the main body now, or do I wait? And I think there's a lot more handling I need to do to the main body before I am done, because like I said, once I put these in, I lose that nice easy handhold. So I think I'm going to just set these aside for right now. Okay, here's a fun bit of piping I've just been playing with. I wanted to put some of this back in. Now there's a red or a frame colored pipe that goes right there, so that's going to give some nice definition up against that, and it kind of wraps there. I'm not going to try to overrun where this, where this pipe would go. That's madness. But just throwing in some nice little brass work there, and of course once I paint it, it'll all look the same color. But what it does is it does throw in some more definition there. This wall here is kind of soft. This wall here is kind of soft. So I'm thinking it's ripe for some definition. Okay, here's that small series of very small, and can I say how tiny they are? Very small single bits of brass there. And the thing about doing all this tiny piping is it's very tiring. It's very stressful, very eye straining, and I'm only going to do a tiny bit of it at a time before I take a break, which I am going to do now. Okay, so this will give you a good idea of the new brass tubing piping I've been putting on, just a little bit here and there. Most of the stuff that's on a single piece is molded in, and that's fine. Where I am putting any replacements are in areas where you are bridging two pieces, like this going down over the side here, or these bits that you needed to see behind and there wouldn't have been a way to mold that in, and things like these guys where it's suspended up in midair and you wouldn't be able to have cast that into a resin bit. But I'm not trying to reinvent the wheel, not trying to overdo anything. Once I get some primer on them, these will all kind of disappear into the background, as it were. But I'm trying to get very close to the point where I am ready to glue this bridge module down. Okay, the last bit of brass I put on today is these 8 bits there that wrap around. Here's 4 on each side. There are 2 here, 2 here, and then 8 more, 4 more on that side. But that is going to be the amount of work I do for today. This brass stuff takes a lot out of you. I think the last thing I'm going to do before I settle down and go off to dinner is I'm going to go ahead and get this thing glued down. I've got the superstructure of the bridge module clamped down, and I do mean clamped. Got some big old clamps holding it in place. It's tough because I want to make sure that it hits all of the spots that were rocking, and finding a vise or something that I had that had a deep enough throat on it was a bit of a trick. And then I'm just going in around the seam with some white tulip, cleaning out the where the epoxy might spill out. Quick cleaning that up before it gets too dry, but then going back in the resulting crack with a little bit of white tulip to seal that up, and let this dry, and tomorrow we'll hit the whole thing with some primer. Yeah, I've taken the clamps off, and this is where we're going to leave it at the end of the day. I went ahead and glued in the other half of the bridge superstructure, so that's going to be drying in all night. And I also went around here where I could or where I needed to with the tulip and put another little bead of the white inside of the crevice here, and we'll see if that's how that dries in, and then we can prime around it tomorrow. And I think the first thing we'll do tomorrow is put these walls in. Morning, folks. It's Wednesday. How you doing? How's everything going in your little world, your little slice of the world? Things are here going pretty darn good. I got to tell you, I have finished up the added brass, the brass that I've added to the main body here of the Valley Forge, and I am ready to prime all of this back into shape. And to do that, I don't want to just hit it with a big spray can and just blast it. That's not going to do anybody any good. So what I need to do is decant some primer into the airbrush and then spray it on just in the spots that I want to do. You'll see I also added the yellow bits here. That's vinyl to add some raised plating, just very subtly raised plating, not huge raised, but just enough, I think. And then when we're going to see how this all blends together, I can't just put straight paint on this brass. It's not going to stick, it'll scratch off and all that kind of stuff. So I need to hit it with a primer before I start putting in the white coats or the lighter coats that will be the final color for the central body here. But I wanted you to see, so you can see, hopefully when I've sprayed all this, the new brass that I put in will so seamlessly blend into the rest of it that you won't know that anything was added. So I'm trying to earn my shekels here by showing that yes, I have put in some additional brass details. Particularly proud of how that one turned out. And these ones were kind of noticeable. Those are the only ones really on the perimeter of the body here that were called out in the instructions that weren't cast in. So getting those guys down was a big deal. And of course they're front and back. And what you're seeing here obviously are the plastic tubes that are meant to protect the chases for the brass pipe. Okay, so I'm taking a few minutes here to rectify another problem that cropped up with the casting. Actually, it didn't crop up, it was there all along. I don't know whether you've noticed in any of the videos before or not, but the two corners here and here, oops, get it in camera, Lou. That would help. The two corners here have been bent up and bowed. And I don't know whether that's in the casting or whether it's a factor of how long this resin had been sitting around, or the cast piece had been sitting in a box until it was sent to me or what. But this one is okay. I mean, I'm probably going to fix it anyway, but this one was bugging me, so I just snapped it off, and I am replacing it with a bit of sheet stock that I can cut to shape and then ferret in. It was just bugging me to the point where I couldn't stand it anymore, so I figured I would go ahead and take care of this now. And I think what I need to do is go ahead and do the same thing on that. Once I figure out my procedure for this, that'll inform how I do the other one. But basically it's a question of putting in a new piece and then sanding the angles down until they form the new corner. It's better to do that than to try to cut an exact piece and put it in place, because the exact piece is small and you're trying to fiddle with a little small dinky thing. It's easier just to put an oversized piece in here, and then just, since it's on the outside corner, there's nothing easier to do than to sand that down or shape it down, even just with regular sandpaper. Although I would probably use recommend a metal file on that, because it will retain the absolute squareness of the shape you're going for. But I'm going to do that and then do the one here, and then I think we're ready to install the 4 pieces that we worked on yesterday. Okay, this other corner went much easier into that gentle good night. All I needed to do was to just took a lighter to it. I did heat up the corner. Heated is a tough word to say. I heated up the corner and let it get good and soft, and then I just put a flat piece of metal against it and held it in shape, and then put some cold water to shock it back into, or shock it into staying in that position. And that's better and a quicker job than I could have done with cutting it and replacing it. Now this is the piece that I cut and replaced, and I'm sanding it, and I need to put a little bit of putty on that seam. But that took care of the two most obnoxious curled corners that we've got. So now I am ready to put the panels, the wall panels, inside here that we worked on yesterday. And then I think I might want to try tackling this elaborate top antenna business. That's going to be a head scratcher, I'll tell you that, because it's tiny resin pieces. I'm looking to see how well that front edge is working. At some point, when all this work is done, I need to go around and start painting this, and it's going to be tough because finding a good place to rest it and let it sit while you're painting the other half, you know, like painting the bottom and then sitting it on something while you're painting the top, is kind of clumsy with this big piece. I'm just sanding up some seam work here. I'm sorry, I'm off camera. There you go. Maybe I can see it. I'm just taking the flat file here, and I'm just filing the inside of this lip. Clean that off. There seems to be some casting boogers in here that need to be taken care of, just to get those cleaned off. Not the easiest spots to get to. This is kind of Star Destroyer looking trench type of arrangement, although it is much cleaner inside that trench than a Star Destroyer ever would be. But hopefully you get the picture of the reference on what I'm talking about. Just doing a bit of the sanding inside there to get rid of some of the casting boogers, like I said. Okay, so this is getting ready to get a lot of the painting done on this. I need to sand a little, or file a little bit more on there. This is the spot where that additional piece went on, and it is, I got a little bit of putty there that I need to let set before I start honking on it with a file. Okay, what I want to do is get these 4 panels in, and then I can set the whole thing off to the side and work on that antenna, or maybe I can paint the white underneath the domes. That might be a better way to spend my day. I have labeled these 1 and 1, so I know what order they need to go into. I want to put a very thin coat of CA on the back of them and put them in place. So see you back when all that's done. Okay, you can see well, maybe you could see it if I put it in camera. There you go. You can see the bottom of this pit, the bottom of the opening here. I've just sanded all of these plates smooth, and I'll put a little bit of primer over those. Flip the whole thing over. And this is where I got to be careful about the number of times I flip things, because there's a lot of sticky up detail here that I need to make sure is not being crushed by the weight of this thing when I flip it over. But here you can see all the detail that we put in yesterday, or all of those panels detailed panels that we made yesterday are in the recess here now, which that means I have effectively lost the ability to use this opening as a way to grip it or move it or do any of that kind of stuff. So I'm just shaving the top of these walls where they are a little, in some cases, just a little bit proud of the surrounding hole. I would say I did 98% of the, 99.5% of getting this lined up. But you can see where the unevenness of the resin piece might not be a perfect match for the sanded walls. So I'm just going through and very lightly trimming, just running the X-Acto blade over the edge so that these inserts line up with the opening. And I'll touch it with a little bit of primer before I get ready to put the white coats over the whole thing. Okay, I just ran I think, oh, it's in camera, here you go. I just ran a little bit of putty over that corner to kind of smooth it up. Put in a nice little detail piece here that does two things. It adds some detail to the sorely lacking bottom. The bottom has not a lot of detail to it, but also kind of dresses up this edge of the framing of the hole, and I think it adds some life what's going on down here, because like I said, there ain't no sort of detail work under here. And I think I'm going to go ahead and put another one on this side. Is it canon? No, at least not to the kit that Tony is making. I don't know. You show me a good picture of the underside of this and tell me that it shouldn't be there. Go ahead, I'll wait. I just want to do and actually what this is going to help is it's going to, by putting a little bit of a bump here, it's going to pick the whole kit up off of the floor a little bit so that the paint won't scrape as badly. But I'm just adding a little bit of detail. Okay, I've just put the first coat of white on the bottom of the dome, and I'm trying to debate whether or not one coat will do it, because here you can see the difference between the deck tan from yesterday and the white from today. And you still see a lot of the shadowing, you still see a lot of the shading, but it is not the stark white on white on white with a little bit of white on the side that you get from looking at the filming model. You still see plenty of shadow and shade and form and all of that, but it is not, doesn't look like your refrigerator, doesn't look like you stepped into the kitchen and you've got your white refrigerator sitting next to the white stove. I think it gives a lot more depth, a lot more form, and you know, you can really go nuts on these big tanks and make those glossy, and you know, skip on some of the details that are further back. Okay, so I've got the first coat of white on all of the domes. I'm happy with how they've turned out. I didn't cover every square inch. I didn't soak the things in white paint. Basically gave it a good spritzing. I could see some spots where I might want to go over again, particularly on these little balls in the tanks. But I like the shadows where they're falling. I think the Lynn Gray underneath everything, and then the deck tan on top of that, is giving me the shadows and the recesses the way I want to see them. And particularly when you see them in off lighting, it really throws the shadows in there the way I want to see them. So I'm going to let these sit. I think I might want to put a satin clear coat on top of these. Whenever you put a clear coat on something you've painted, it has a tendency to bring up the colors and make them more contrasty. So I may take one of them and use it as a guinea pig to see whether or not I want to do the rest of them. If not, I can repaint the one and not worry about it, or flat coat back over top of it. Okay, so I'm very encouraged by these results. I just took this one dome outside and sprayed it with a satin coat. And I don't know how well it's showing up on the camera, but you can see, particularly when you put it next to a flat coated one, you can see the highlights on the tanks and on the fuel, those little balls and all of that. It's actually bringing out the shadowing and the shading a little better. So yeah, I am very happy with that. I'm willing to call these a painted thing. This is really nice. I've just got all of the domes brought back in from outside where they were sitting in the afternoon sun drying. And I've got a clear coat on all of them, and they look beautiful. You can really see the gloss shine on the, or the semi-gloss shine at least, on the tops of the tanks and these fuel balls. So what I want to do at this point is spray this inside rim with a dark gray. I'm using a German gray. And that's going to give me a basis for the domes to sit in and the landscaping to sit in. And it's just going to give me a nice dark palette for all that stuff to happen against. Well, good morning. It is Thursday. It is the gateway to the weekend. Again, every day these days feels like a weekend. And I'm working on the central portion of the Valley Forge here. And I'm running into an issue that I'm going to have to take steps to alleviate, to mitigate. That's the word I'm looking for. To cut it off at the pass. I don't know how well that's showing up on camera, but if you can see these are the channels that the brass tubing goes into from the bottom. I mean, the problem is they're starting to show up. I've been sanding this and trying to get a nice smooth surface on here to get some white paint on it. And they're starting to transfer through here. They're getting too close to the surface, and I'm afraid if I do any more, it's going to open up a can of worms the size of the worms on Arrakis, and I don't want to get there. So, better to do something and ask forgiveness than to ask permission. I'm taking a sheet of fairly beefy styrene, and I'm just going to lay a plate right in here that's going to cover it from stem to stern. And it's going to cover over that. Not only will it thicken the area between the channels and the outer surface, but it'll give me a nice smooth surface that I can get a good paint on. So I've got it out in the other room. I've got a coat of primer on it now. I'll give it another light coat of primer and then paint it, and then I'm going to glue it down into place. I'm going to take a nice even spreading of an epoxy, and I'm going to epoxy that over this area because I'm just afraid that you can see that the detail is starting to transfer through even the paint that I put on here. So that's something I need to mitigate before it gets any worse. I'm going to rough up the areas around it so that the epoxy will stick to it very well. But that's just something that I need to take care of. And here's my justification. I don't think I need to justify it, but here's my justification. It's on the bottom. You're not going to see this area. This is basically preventative medicine at this point. You're gonna be interested in seeing all of this. So one little piece of extra piece of plastic here, more or less, is not going to spoil the look of anything. But I want to go ahead and get that taken care of and get it painted in before we go any further with doing the top and sides. Okay, here is that plate. I've got a quick coat of the first coat of primer on this. I'm just going to give it a good buffing here with a sponge, put another coat of the primer on it, and then hit it with the white. And I think what I'm going to do next is put a white sandable primer over top of it, and then glue it down. But that's basically all it is. It's very low profile. Like I said, all I want to do is reinforce this area of the resin. Okay, I'm starting on the fiddliest bit of work that there is, and that is the bridge antenna. And I've taken a few of the JPEGs from the instructions that are in color, and I have boiled them down and printed them to a piece of piece of paper, so that I am not running back and forth and trying to go to the monitor to check something and then come back and you know, do a little building and then go and check it again and all that. So let's get some of these parts cut off the fret and get to building. This is a quick note to show you what I was saying yesterday or the other day, or you know how they all blend together. The other day about things that look larger on the instructions, and this has been reduced down. I'm used to looking at this on a big screen on the monitor, but you reduce it down and then you realize this part here is this tiny part right here, and you really have to go through a bit of a recalibration of your expectations, because it looks big on the page, but then you realize, oh, when they say 0.5 of an inch length, that's actually only about that big. So yeah, luckily I've had my coffee this morning and my nerves are just as steady as a rock. Okay, here is the result of maybe an hour and a half's worth of work. And that's just the one segment of the bridge antenna. And that's a mess. It is very fiddly work. And once I get a coat of paint on it, hopefully it'll look better. But man, and that's this piece right up here. That's the one that's in this top corner. So you get a deceptive idea of how big that actually is going to be. So now this, hopefully the two side ones should be a lot easier, because all they are discs on panels. So let's find out how much easier those are going to be. Okay, those were painfully simple. There's something to be said about starting with the most difficult thing first, because everything after that seems to be so much easier. But those are the two side ones. These three things all together make up the array that goes on. Oh boy. Oh boy. That's just a ton of work here. Okay, let's continue. Okay, I've got the majority of the antennae for the bridge done. And I would say that's equal parts brass and CA, holding that together with that resin strip there. I won't know truly how ugly this is until I get the paint on it, but there is a significant accumulation of CA on here, and I don't know how many of the grill pieces have been closed up due to it. So we're going to enjoy that mystery together. Now to finish this, I have to tackle the scariest part of photo etch that I have ever seen, and that is the two pieces that make up, yes, it is the two pieces that make up the base for that have to be cut, folded, and put into shape. That looks so much easier to do in print form than it does when it comes to doing it in reality. So we're going to see how easily that is accomplished. And this day is zipping by. It's 2 o'clock now, and it's time flies when you're working on really intensive, tedious work that is very exacting and makes my eyes go bulgy. I had to take the visor off because it was giving me a headache. That's how intense this is. Look at that. That is 1/2 of the stand for the upper bridge radar or antenna. And this is the bridge antenna. You've seen that, but that's going to balance on top of that. So if you don't think this is some fine fiddly work, you got another thing coming. I've got to find a way to get these guys glued down, and I still have to do the other one yet. I think if I can get one of them glued down, then I can kind of form it in place. And boy, I hate the idea of relying on doing that too much. And then I can cut the other one off, but I don't. There's only so small that a drop is. I mean, to put a drop of resin on here, even the real thin stuff, that drop is only ever going to be so small. And right now the drops are bigger than the areas that they are resting on. So it really makes the ganglia twitch as far as trying to get everything lined up and in place and stuck down. This is the finest, and I don't mean fine as in great, I mean fine as in tiny detailed work that I think I have ever done. I mean, I'd rather go back to wiring up SMLEDs than to do too much of this. So I want to get one of these down and then take a long break. This is a this is what I've been doing all bloody day, but this is probably the crowning achievement of photo etch in my photo etching career. That is hopefully it'll look better once I get some paint on it, but man, oh man, Ashevitz, that is a handful. Yeah, I want to touch that up with some paint though to hopefully make all that come together. Yeesh! It's not great from any one angle, but I think overall it looks good. Alrighty, I'm working on the forward radar, having my good and pleasant fill of the bridge antenna, and this is what I've got accomplished so far. Now look at the gossamer thin 3D printed frame that comes with this kit. Now I've put on these antennae and the photo etch on the center, but look at that. Take a look at how delicate that is. And now I am just putting on the last couple of bibs and bobs, and then I'm going to put both of these aside and call it a day. Lord Almighty, I'm glad to be done with today's work. What was it I said last week about the girders being the hardest part of it? I would dance through fire with those girders on my head if I could right now, rather than go through all of this again. But that's the front radar, and I will put that aside, and tomorrow we will put some paint on those. Okay, I'm closing down for the day, but I put a quick coat of primer over all of this stuff because I wanted to give it a whole night to dry. So there you go. Whoops. Try to put a background behind it so that it will be easier to see. There you go. Didn't close up too many holes. I'll wait till tomorrow and see if I need to drill any of them back out. Holes in the grill, that is. And here is the front radar, which turned out to be not as difficult as the bridge. But there you go. That's it for one day. Trust me, that was more than enough. And oh, that stuff I got done on the midsection done this morning. That's so long ago I'd almost forgotten about it. Morning, kids. It is Friday once again. Where does the time go? We are going to hopefully, the goal is today to finish painting the main structure here, and then that will leave us next week to do the interiors of the domes, and that'll be fun. But today I'm going to finish up. I've refreshed, I have gone to therapy, everything that I need to do to get over the trauma that is making this antenna here, and the front radar, which is sequestered over on the other table, and patching, and not patching, but using the remaining details on the rear radar. That's where those other bits went, whereas the rear radar. So that, with all of that done and behind me, I'm very carefully going to move this off because there's no sense gluing that down yet. But look at that. Just take a long, fresh look at that. Yes, that's where my mind went, in case anybody wants to know. When did Lou lose his marbles? They all went right here. So we're going to... There's that compressor. You know I love it. I'm going to put that over there just to be way out of camera range, and to be safe. He said, crossing his fingers, because you know what's going to happen. I could take that and put it in a bunker 3 states away, and it would still, something would still fall on it. So we're going to sequester that out of the way in its own little quarantine. And we are going to hit the, start hitting this with the flat white and a little bit of a warm white, almost a cream. I want to introduce some of that in here because it's, you know, all of that stark whiteness is going to be a bit monotonous after a while. We're just going to play this as it lays and see where the paint lays as it goes down. But I do want to put some sort of weathering, if not just to accentuate some detail. And I think I'll do what I did in the on those 4 pieces that went inside here, and that is just to put a wash behind some things, hit other things with highlights, and then dry brush over them. See how it all plays out. But the first thing I need to do is to get a nice white coat, lightly coated on top of this. Okay, so I'm ready to finally start painting. I had to do that most hated of all things, which was cleaning the airbrush, because I'm getting ready to spray white paint. And white paint is that demon thing that if you have any color whatsoever in your airbrush left over from any other spraying you might have done, it will jump up, it will attach itself to the white paint, and then it will spatter itself all over your model, and you will have a bad day. So it is time to put on a white coat, play doctor, and put on the white coat. There we go. Again, I'm leaving the white in the shadows, in the shading, because that's why I put it there. And I'm just hitting the high spots. And that's all it takes. That's the that's the front edge done. Okay. And how much of that, how much of this you do is completely dependent on how white and bright you want this to look. I want to see some shadows in there. I want to see some shading. These ships have been on space for 8 years at this point. And if you hit it just right, the all it picks up is the top level of the detail work, or of the bits that stick out, and it looks particularly nice. Gives you all kinds of contrast and shadow lines. I'll load it up with some white. And I might want to dilute this a little bit because I'm getting to the bottom of this particular jar of flat white. And when that happens, you've got pigment sitting on the bottom, and the carrier has long since left the building. So let me refresh the mix here a bit. What I like to do is add the thinner to the bottle rather than to what's going on in the cup. And then by squeezing it and emptying the pipette and doing that 2 or 3 times, I get a good mixture of it rather than trying to stir it. I prefer just to mix it by squeezing and unsqueezing the pipette. Okay, so we'll put some fresh in the brush, get it going. And I'm just revealing the high spots and leaving the shadows. Oh yeah. Yeah, buddy, that's working just nice. Oops, ran out. Got a dot here of too diluted of paint. Now I find, particularly working with white, that it's better to hit numerous light coats than it is to try to get it all pristine white with one coat, because that way just lies madness, because you will end up saturating the area and that's just going to make runny paint. And it helps if you keep some in your brush. If it comes out too dry, it has a tendency to get that pebbly texture on it, which I don't care for myself. And particularly depending on the scale of the kit you're working, that pebbly texture can be quite distracting. So that's, when that happens, I can tell that the paint was too dry. There's too much pigment and not enough carrier. Trying to keep these plastic pipes in place, and they want to blow away, but these are the things that keep those channels clean. What I want is a nice bright white in there, because that's going to give me the more contrast between the red piping. That's the hero shot of the ship, is the window right there where Freeman is washing his salad. Okay, that's a good spot to let her sit, and then I can come back to it and hit some spots again, and the more you come back to it, the brighter the whites are going to be. So that's it for stage one. Okay, I'm back from lunch and from the hobby shop. I went to my Bojangles, and unfortunately, since the dining room is closed, I had to bring it home, which means I don't get my refill on my tea, because I normally will go through maybe 3 cups of Bojangles tea, and I'm really missing that, the free refill. But I went to the hobby shop. A, it was great to get out, and B, just, great to go to the hobby shop and stock up on some more supplies for the Valley Forge, notably a bag full of model railroad landscaping material, so that I can work next week on the domes. But now I'm ready to put the second coat of white over top of these details and let that dry. And then after that, well, I'll determine whether or not it's going to warrant a third coat. And if it gets a third coat, then it'll be a question of putting a a satin clear overcoat on all of this. And this is where we are going to close it off for this week. Got a lot done. This is simply too heavy to be picking up and hoisting around, but look at that antenna. Antenna is done. The forward radar is done. I added some more bits on it today to go out to the radar, or to the little dishes there. They mentioned using thread, but any thread that I put on there, a monofilament, I would just end up pulling either, it would be slack and ugly, or too tight and it would distort things, so I just added some even finer wire just in those bits where they would have wanted the monofilament. So there, that's taken care of. These are what the domes look like underneath. I've got them painted black, just blacked out on the inside of the top. But those are ready to go. These take these temporary rods out. And this is, you know, I never want to say something is done until it's done. But this is about as done as I plan on doing, unless I just get a wild hair to put in more, put more white on it. I really don't want to go overboard with the white. I like having these shadows and shades. I know that the filming model is probably brighter than this, but as I've said earlier, the filming model also has studio lights blaring on it all the time to give you high contrast shadows. I kind of had to cook some of these shadows in so that I didn't have to depend on bright light shining on them. Now in dim light, it accentuates them even more, but I think unless I get it all together and I really don't like it, I think I'm very happy with how this has turned out. And we take this bit off the top, which is not glued down, and I see I almost grabbed it there, which would be fatal because there's detail stuff in there now. So if I grab it from this side, you can see the underside, and you can see that panel that I put in. Overall, I'm very happy with how that is. And that's going to do it, kids. It's been a heck of a week on week 2 of the Valley Forge. Getting all of that photo etch done was maddening. But I'm glad it's done. And look what I've got in store for next week. Yes, little pine trees and little bushes and stuff like that. Next week is going to be fun. It's going to be Dome City. Welcome to Dome City with all your doming needs. But that's next week. This week we got, I would say, all of the resin bits done. I don't see adding a lot more detail to these. Of course, once I get the domes in, then we'll know. But the white paint on them is pretty much it. As I've said before, I'm trying to bake in some, I'm trying to bake in, I could pick it up, how about that? Bake in some detail. Now, if I show the, stick this up to the camera right now, and you can see the shadows and everything from the bright sunlight coming in the window there and throwing shadows on everything. I think, and I may be spoiled, I may be trying to do too much of Star Destroyer on this, but I think that having the extra shadowing and shading on this really makes it stand out, really makes it pop. So like I said, next week, I don't know if we'll wrap it up or not. Next week we got domes to do and the base. I'm going to make a base for this so that it kind of sits on a shelf but doesn't sit flat. I want it to kind of like sit up at an angle like this. You know, sit up at an angle like that on a shelf, so maybe a 30, 35, 40 degree angle, something like that. So it sits up at an angle like that on the shelf. It takes up less depth in the room. And so I don't know whether I'll start on that this weekend or whether I will wait till next week to work on that. But it's coming along. No great rush. It's going pretty smoothly. I'm afraid if I start pushing things, it's going to snafu. So I'm in no rush to get it finished. So until next week, when we are practicing our landscaping skills. You all be good. Be good to each other. Be safe. Don't be sorry. And we'll see you here next time. I wanted to say that I got a submission the other day from a kind gentleman named Andre. Presuming gentleman. Don't know him. He could be a scad. He could be a cad. But Andre sent me a new opener. A new credit sequence. I'm going to put it in right here. See what y'all think about it. I kind of like it, but I kind of miss the Lloyd Bridges quote because it's just playful and folksy enough that I like keeping it in there. So maybe I might tack that into his opening. So who knows? Let me know what you think about it. I'm going to tack it in now, and then we'll sign off.